Good afternoon from Central Virginia. How is everybody out there in Idiocracy land? I've got my Brondo shirt on, the Thirst Mutilator. Brondo, it has electrolytes. If you've never seen the Idiocracy movie, I highly recommend it. It was a comedy done by Mike Judge back in 2006. He's the one who invented, or I should say, created Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill, the TV cartoon. Um, anyway, he pure genius. But Idiocracy was a movie that was supposed to be a comedy, but it's turning out to be a documentary. The premise of the movie was that the government was concerned that smart people were not reproducing as fast as dumb people, and that something was going to have to be done about it for the future. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I highly recommend it. You can stream it on Amazon Prime, I believe, and it's not even 90 minutes long, but you almost have to watch it twice because there's so many things in the background. But enough about that. I just wanted to make a comment about the crazy level of discourse I'm seeing regarding that tragic shooting in Minneapolis yesterday, where a boy who identified as a girl, I'll leave it at that, in his mid-20s, shot people while they were praying, while the students were at Mass in a school that was at a church. I just, stuff like that, it just makes you wonder. People around the world think we're really sick. And the people on the political right are saying, oh, thoughts and prayers. The people on the political left are like, we need to ban guns now. Nobody's really acknowledging the fact that we have a very severe problem in our country with mental illness, people who don't really know whether they're a boy or a girl or what they should be or whatever, and a lot of people on psychotropic drugs. You put all those things together, you have somebody who's, some people are wired wrong. I get that. But some people are affirmed. I hate that word, gender affirming, but people are given I don't know, I guess they believe things that aren't so, and then the people around them affirm that. It shouldn't be called affirming. You're actually changing it. If you were going to affirm somebody's gender, you would say, okay, you're a little boy. Here's a cap gun. Here's a truck. Here's a ball. Let's throw the ball, play some sports or something. And if you have a little girl, get her a doll baby and teach her how to wear a dress. I know that sounds like so 1950s, but anyway, that's how you would reinforce it. What you're doing is you're changing it. You're telling people, well, you don't fit in or whatever, so you must be trans. So we're going to put you on the pipeline to change your gender. If you're a boy, you really can be a girl. Well, that's not really true. I have two people in my extended family who are going through that. Fortunately, they're both well over 18, but you get this situation where people are believing stuff that isn't so. And you can saw things off. You can sew things on. If you're a man, you can grow your hair out. If you're a woman, you can cut your hair. But you still can't change what is. You're never going to have a male give birth to a baby, and you're never going to have a female father a child. That's just simple. And you can say that that's cruel and insensitive or whatever. I don't make the rules. I just understand them. They change the language that they say, what's your sex assigned at birth? I'm like, what? I actually had to go to the doctor, and that was one of the questions on there. And I said to the lady, I said, well, it wasn't really assigned at birth. It was assigned at conception. And she says, I know. We just have to put it on there. But, I really feel for somebody going through that. But it's like you get all this stuff around. You get these people, they're affirmed by their teachers. Maybe their parents are in on it. Maybe they're from California or something. But they start to believe that it's true. And then when they get outside their circle of confidants, their teachers, their school people, their friends, their relatives, then other people don't really buy into it. If I'm at the grocery store and there's a 6'2" guy there with a dress and a big red beard, uh, I'm not going to say, I might make the mistake of saying, "Have a good day, sir." And I'm going to get "I'm a ma'am." And okay, yeah, well, all right, I don't wish any harm to you, but what do those people do when they date? I mean, how do you, if you're, and I've seen some pretty good post-op people who could fool you. You're like, that really looks like a woman until she says, "Hi, my name's Kevin." But no, seriously, I mean, I've seen, but how do you date? Because I'm married and I'm old, so I'm off the market. But if you're dating a woman, you probably want a woman who has female parts. If I don't know. I mean, I wish people the best of luck. Let them live their best life. But what happens is sometimes they get into a situation where either they made the wrong choice, they were talked into it when they were younger, or maybe they felt, a long time ago that they were born in the wrong body. I get it, but you can't change that. You can do a lot of things with medical science, but you can only take it so far. And I guess it's bothersome because they do this to children. I mean, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather now, and I just think of you look at these little kids and how could somebody do that? When I was 6 years old, I identified as a train. I told my mother I wanted to be a train. Do you think my mom crushed up coal and fed it to me at dinner because I wanted to be a train? Oh, that shows how old I am. Back then, trains ran on coal. But nevertheless, she didn't give me diesel fuel to drink either. But, I just, where did we go wrong as our society? When did this, it just seems like it's been a thing recently. And a lot of these people involved in these shootings end up being non-binary or trans or what, and I know that the majority of people who are what do you call them? Sexual abnormality? No, that's not the word. People with gender dysphoria. That's it. The majority of people are not violent. They just pretty much want to be left alone. And I believe in that. But a disproportionate number of these people who have perpetrated mass shootings have been of the transgender variety. There's some kind of correlation. I don't know what it is. I mean, you probably have to have the wisdom of Solomon to figure this out. But, is it that they get affirmed for so long, and then when they get out in the real world, it doesn't work, and then they get mad? Do they regret changing? Do they, can they go back? I mean, once you start down the road, they say, "Oh, we can give them puberty blockers. That's only temporary." Well, when you're going through puberty and your body is developing, that's not a temporary, you can't just shut off a boy between 13 and 15 and then pick it up again when something's going to be messed out of whack. I'm not going to get graphic, but certain organs of the body are not going to develop properly. And probably the same thing with women. The surgery is probably more dangerous to a male than a female, but you could still ruin a woman who might want to have children. I mean, I remember in high school, there were girls who were tomboys, and in junior high, there were girls who were tomboys. And, what if somebody would have came to them and said, "Well, you really want to be a boy, don't you?" And bad things could happen. And, we all had friends who might have been a little, they sang soprano or they were a little light in the loafers growing up. Doesn't mean that they were supposed to be a girl. I don't know. I'm kind of glad to be over 60. I'm kind of glad to be as old as I am, but I just see the discourse today on social media, the way people are talking about this. It's like, well, we just need more God in our lives. We need more thoughts and prayers. Okay. Now, thoughts and prayers aren't going to hurt anybody. And I believe that for somebody grieving, When somebody says they send their thoughts and prayers, I believe they're sincere about it. And that might provide comfort to somebody going through a very, very painful, traumatic time. But it's not going to prevent such a thing from happening. Now, the people on the other side, well, let's ban all guns. Well, we already have more than 20,000 gun laws, statutes, ordinances, and regulations pertaining to firearms, from the sale, possession, transfer, carry, and usage thereof. Some states even have rules on ammunition. But this happened in Minnesota, which is not exactly a pro-Second Amendment state. And then you have their senator, Amy Klobuchar, come out and say, well, this is why we need to ban automatic weapons. Well, it shows that she's either ignorant or she's lying through her teeth, because automatic weapons are banned already. It is very, very difficult to get a fully automatic weapon. Now, she might confuse semi-automatic and automatic, but it's not much comfort that she represents her state in the United States Senate. There's only 2 of them from Minnesota in the Senate. And she's crafting gun laws, and she doesn't know the difference between full auto and semi-auto. Or she was being deliberately deceptive. I don't know. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, but she sounded very ignorant on the issue. And of course, this is what they're going to rally around. Well, some psycho goes in and shoots people, so let's ban firearms from people who didn't commit any crime. How's that supposed to work? It doesn't. We're in a weird place in our country, and we've got all these gun laws already, and they're not being enforced. And every time there's a shooting like this, it's like, well, this is why we need to ban this type of gun. And people don't realize that, yeah, the AR-15, that platform does make headlines because it is commonly used by people who commit mass shootings, but by far and away, most homicides are with handguns, like a Glock or a Ruger, a SIG, a Taurus, or something like that. And basically, an AR-15 operates the same way as a Glock 9mm. It's just bigger and more complicated, but it's still semi-automatic, 1 pull per trigger. But see, the left, they try and make it sound like everybody's walking around with machine guns. And then they always blame the NRA. Well, it turns out that none of these people who were caught for this ever seem to have any affiliation with the NRA. Every time there's one of these mass shootings, they will come out, and they want it to be a guy who looks like me with an F-150 pickup truck, and maybe a guy wearing a MAGA hat who's an NRA member. And it just doesn't seem that that's the case. In many cases, it's not. It's generally not even people who are Republicans. They try to say that this guy was a right-wing anti-Semite and all that, but then on his weapon it said something about killing Trump. And he said he had something. He made a video where he was, talking about Jews and stuff like that. That's not exactly. People on the right generally don't do that. Now, there are some on the far right who hate Jewish people. I don't know why, but they do. But there's a lot more on the far left who do. This guy apparently had a Palestinian flag somewhere in his video behind him. He was talking about freeing Gaza and ending the genocide and all this stuff. And it looked like all left-wing stuff from what I heard. But honestly, it doesn't matter what his political persuasion was. He could have been a Donald Trump campaign supporter, and it wouldn't have mattered. It was heinous. It was horrible. And, people say, okay, well, what's the solution? Well, it's not banning guns. The solution, a lot of people aren't going to like this. The solution is to harden the target. You need to get rid of unsecured gun-free zones. If you look at your average school, they'll have a sign up outside, this is a gun-free zone. Okay, so all that does is that means that I'm former law enforcement, I'm former Army. I'm not a crack shot or anything, but I'm familiar with firearms. I have a concealed carry permit. I've had one for 30 years. I can't carry a firearm on school property unless I'm driving through there in my car and I don't get out of my car. The firearm can be with me in the car. I cannot get out of the car with it. That's a felony. So now, what if I am I don't have any kids in school anymore, but what if I'm picking up a nephew or a grandson or something, and I'm driving around the outside of the school and I have a firearm with me, I've got a permit for it, and all of a sudden I see a guy, dressed in a trench coat with a short barreled rifle and he's headed towards the school. Okay. Well, that poses a very serious question. What do I do? Okay. If I have a handgun, I'm not really much of a match against somebody with a rifle. But tactically, if I had the element of surprise and I could somehow get ahead of them or get a jump on them, might have a chance. But now I get out of the car. Now, what if there's a police officer nearby? I'm going to get confused for a bad guy, and I'm going to be risk of getting arrested for a felony. I could go in there or I'm not going to say me, but let's say somebody with a valid permit stopped an active shooter in school and saved dozens of countless lives and took out a shooter. Okay. In most jurisdictions in the United States, that man would be arrested and charged with a felony, even though he saved lives. I mean, maybe if there was enough public outcry, the charges might be dropped. But I know some of the jurisdictions in our state here, you'll get more time for possessing a firearm where you're not supposed to have it. Even if you're a law-abiding citizen with a permit, you get caught in a gun-free zone, they'll drop the hammer on you more than they will a robber who uses a firearm to rob a liquor store, a grocery store, or a bank. That's just the way our society has gotten today. And you'll be accused of being a vigilante. Well, that's not what a vigilante does. A vigilante would be somebody, I don't know, like Jack Ruby or whatever, somebody who goes out, you take the law in your own hands down the road after something happened. When you don't like the outcome of it, you take the guy out. That's a vigilante. That's not defending yourself or defending somebody else. But I don't want to get too far off in the weeds, but need to shore up these gun-free zones. What do we use? We use armed guards to protect jewelry stores, courthouses, maybe a government building, a sheriff's office, a police department, a state police barracks, a bank, some upscale shopping centers. You might have certain high-end residential communities might have armed security. But what do we do for schools? Not a damn thing. The kids are sitting ducks. Okay? You want to stop school shootings? Take a page out of what Utah did. They passed a law in Utah that anybody with a concealed carry permit, if the school district policy allows it, they can carry on school premise. That's parents, visitors, custodians, teachers, whatnot. If you have a valid carry permit, you can carry on school property. And Utah, to my knowledge, doesn't have a lot of school shootings. One of the rural states, I believe it was Tennessee, there was a sheriff in one of those counties, and he only has a handful of deputies. So he took some teachers and put them through an abbreviated police academy, made them special reserve deputy sheriffs. They only had powers on school property and during school hours, and they were allowed to be armed because they had badges, so they weren't in violation of the Gun-Free Zone Act. That allowed a lot more manpower, and they could carry concealed. So a perpetrator, you have to look at things from the perspective of the bad guy. Okay, a lot of these demented killers are crazy, but they're not stupid. So if you're gonna take out people at a school, you're gonna look around, you're gonna survey the area a little bit, see what's going on. And let's say there's a sheriff's deputy or a police officer, the school resource officer there. You'll see his SUV sitting outside. Okay, so you see where the officer is. He's on one side of the building. You got free reign on the other side. Nobody else in there is going to be armed. Or let's say that sheriff's deputy goes out for lunch or to get a cup of coffee. He leaves in his car. His car's not there. Hey, buddy, that campus is yours for the taking. Okay, we need to change that. We need to stop giving the bad guys a tactical advantage. You should have active and passive measures to keep a bad guy out of the building. Okay. Now, that's plan A. If plan A doesn't work, then plan B is you need to have people who are armed and trained inside the school, inside the building, who can assess, address and neutralize the threat. Now, I don't know which county it was, but the one in Utah, they actually have a sign outside, and it says basically that we have armed staff members on the school campus, and they will use any means necessary, including lethal force, to protect our students and our faculty. And I think that would serve more as a deterrent to an aspiring bad guy than a sign that says no guns. Well, then people say, well, if they're willing to give up their life and they're going to kill themselves after they shoot other people, then they're not going to care if armed people are there. Yeah, they are, because they want to be able to inflict damage before they get taken out. Okay, like I said, they're crazy. That doesn't mean they're stupid. You have to think outside the box here. Okay, in our country, there are about 120 million Americans who own more than 400 million guns of various types and about 2.5 trillion rounds of ammunition. Okay, you can pass whatever kind of law you want. They ain't going away. It's not going to happen. And 29, soon to be 30 states now have permitless carry, which not one of them has voted to repeal it. They've had largely positive results. Now, there are some states where the murder rate has gone up, but those are not people who are legally allowed to carry a firearm anyway. So the permitless carry law had nothing to do with them. If you're a felon or an otherwise prohibited person, you are not allowed to have a firearm at all. Doesn't matter beyond that. The permitless carry just means that if you're not a prohibited person, you can carry a concealed firearm. They call it constitutional carry, but that's not really correct. If it were constitutional carry, you could carry openly or concealed. Florida requires you to carry concealed. You can't carry openly unless you're law enforcement on duty. But if you had constitutional carry, you wouldn't have gun-free zones either. Some states, you can't carry a gun within 150 feet of a school. You can't carry a gun if you're in a city bigger than a certain amount. You can't carry more than X number of rounds in your magazine. That's not constitutional carry. That's permitless carry, but they still have too many restrictions on it. I'm a stickler for using the proper language, and I hate it when they apply terms to things, like when they say assault weapon, and they don't even know what it means. It's just a buzzword. It's based on cosmetics and accessories, not sustained rate of fire, ballistics, range, or anything like that. An AR-15, by the military definition, is not an assault rifle. An M16 or an M4 is, because it's selective fire. Civilians cannot own those unless you spend a lot of money, get a tax stamp, and go through BATF approval. You cannot own something that goes pew, pew, pew. You can just get pew, pew, but pew, pew, pew is where you pull the trigger one time and 3 rounds come out. That's selective fire. Or automatic, where you hold it back and it shoots like a machine gun. Under normal circumstances, you cannot own that unless you pay. It'll cost you thousands of dollars for one, and the tax stamp and the BATF approval, plus you have to notify your sheriff too. So not too many Americans own true assault weapons. Now, the politicians will say an assault weapon is something that, it's a black rifle that looks scary. They don't know anything about ballistics or whatnot. Like with a lot of politicians, a Ruger Mini 14 just looks like a deer rifle, and they don't even think twice about it. But it fires the same round as an AR-15. It just has a wooden stock, and it doesn't, it doesn't have the pistol grip on it. It doesn't have the folding stock. It looks more like a regular deer rifle, but it does have the same range and ballistics as an AR-15. It's just not scary looking. So and then you could buy an AR in a 22 caliber, just a 22 LR for plinking, and it looks like an AR-15, but it's not nearly as lethal. You can also buy an AR. You can buy a BB gun in an AR platform, and I mean it'll look like a badass weapon. It's just a BB gun. You could also buy an AR-10, which is chambered for .308. And I believe it's a .308 Winchester round, a 7.62. That thing looks like an AR-15, but the barrel is bigger, and it's obviously a bigger round, packs more punch. And there's an AR-12, which is a shotgun, semi-automatic shotgun. So there's so many different weapons out there, but the majority of homicides are committed with handguns. So, I think the AR-15 is just a way of getting the camel's nose under the tent. If they can get a ban on an AR-15, then when that doesn't work, then they'll go to lever action rifles or bolt action rifles or shotguns, revolvers. They won't stop. People think that, well, if we just let them ban this, then they're going to keep going. But if you really want a solution, you got to make the target harder. You have to realize that the good guys have to be right all the time. The bad guy only has to be right once. And I think that we need a higher level of discourse. Plus, we need people who actually know about firearms and know how they work to be involved in the discussion. When you get some of these people, when they use terms like high capacity magazines, or worse yet, they'll call it a clip, or they don't know the difference between a suppressor and a barrel shroud. They don't know a clip from a magazine. They don't know an assault rifle from a blunderbuss. Those are not really the people you want in on the discussion. But unfortunately, that's the majority of people. They don't know. They don't really understand how firearms work. And, a 30-round magazine is standard for an AR-15. It's not high capacity. If you ever have seen an AR-15 with a 10-round magazine, it barely sticks out beyond the magazine well. It's almost hard to grip it. 20 or 30 rounds is a standard size. Now, 30 rounds for a Glock pistol, that would be a high-capacity magazine. But your average Glock 9mm, they usually, like a Glock 19, holds 15 rounds, plus one in the pipe. So that's 16 rounds. But if they want to ban an AR, they're going to want to ban a Glock too, because an AR-15 and a Glock 9mm work the same basic way. The AR is just bigger, and it's a rifle, but it's the same one shot per trigger pull, recoil operated, it works the same way. A lot of people don't realize that, but I just, it is really sad that, children have to be fodder, rhetorical fodder for these ghouls who they view these children's deaths as something necessary to push a political agenda. And when these tragedies happen, I really believe that there are people with a tyrannical bent who, when it happens, the first thing they say is, oh man, it needs to let it be a Republican white guy with a pickup truck. Yeah, we need to push that. And then when it turns out that it's not, that doesn't push the desired narrative, they try to make it, well, it's all about the guns. It's not, and then they'll say, oh, don't blame trans people. Okay. Don't blame our favorite group, blame those people over there. But really, kids lose their lives. And there are some people who think that, you got to make a few eggs. You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And they're using this. The bodies aren't even cold yet. And they're already using this to push a tyrannical political agenda. It's just sick and disgusting. But that's the way we are today. So that's what I wanted to say about that. But yeah, sometimes when you watch the news, you feel like you need a big cup of Brawndo to deal with the idiocy that's out in front of you. But I hope everybody has a good Thursday afternoon. I'm kind of winding down here. It's just all this stuff going on. It gives you information overload, I'll tell you that. But everybody out there, just be safe and try and have a good day. And remember, if you're on the right, thoughts and prayers aren't going to fix this. If you're on the left, taking guns away from peaceable citizens is not going to do anything. It requires intelligent, civil, and respectful conversation from a standpoint of logic instead of emotion. That's the stream for today. Be safe.